Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be unto you and the mercy of Allah and his blessings. Uh, Welcome, friends. Thank you for joining me. Hopefully, this will be a brief discussion um, based on this book. This is the second edition, the revised edition, revised and updated, uh, entitled The 100, a ranking of the most influential persons in history, by Michael H. Hart. The author is was uh, he might still be alive, um, not a historian. I believe he was actually a physicist. Uh, but at any rate, he wrote this book, which I recommend not so much as a scholarly history book, but as what I call a coffee table book. Um, for people who like to discuss and argue about all kinds of historical things and whatnot, anything. They just like love books, love to talk, love to argue. Um, and this book lists the 100. Um, Aside from what is said about Muhammad, um, which is not negative, but misleading. My main issue with the book is that Thomas Jefferson and Napoleon are mentioned and ranked largely because of the Louisiana Purchase. I don't know if you know about that, but I won't go into it right now. Uh, but the Louisiana Purchase was Napoleon had to get rid of it, and he needed money, and he offered it to the President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, who had the foresight to accept the offer. And although, of course, you had France and the United States buying and selling the land that other nations were living on, right? We're not taught history this way, but neither France nor the United States had a legitimate claim to any of that land. But they didn't care about who was living there. They just took it, sold it, um, and I imagine a science fiction plot in which the, the empires out there and the earth is a part of their empire, and we don't even know it. Don't know they're out there and they're busily exchanging the earth. And one day, of course, their soldiers will arrive and we have no idea what is going on. And that is to a large extent what happened here in North America. Um, but at any rate, the reason Napoleon had to sell this land was because of Toussaint Louverture and the revolution in Haiti. And Haiti was the linchpin. I mean, it was it was everything to France. Um, and once they lost it, which in itself was an amazing thing, they had lost their base in the Caribbean. And so the entire Louisiana territory became useless to them, and they had to get rid of it. Toussaint Louverture was the leader of the only slave rebellion in history that not merely successful, they established their own nation. The only in all of known history was the only one. And yet Toussaint Louverture is not among the 100. Instead, the credit for the transfer of that huge territory is given to Jefferson and Napoleon. So that's one of the issues I have with the book. But this is the sort of thing where a group of people can sit around in their living room and argue about such things. But at any rate, Muhammad is listed as the first one, the most influential person in history. And I agree with that assessment. As a matter of fact, I hadn't even thought about it until I saw this book. Um, because, I mean, for me, Muhammad uh, was not only the messenger of Allah, and still is, even though physically he's passed on, um, but the last prophet, all of the prophets. And for Muslims, if for people who read the Quran, because a lot of Muslims don't even understand this, Adam was the first prophet. Okay, And that's another discussion, right? Was Adam the first human being? A few thousand years ago is the first. Well, we know that's not true. Um, he was the first member of he was the first prophet. I'll just leave it at that. We know that our species, human beings, Homo sapiens, whatever you want to call us, have been around for at least 200,000 years. And the story of Adam is not the story of that. But at any rate, from Adam through Noah and Abraham and all of them and all of the prophets down to Muhammad, and Muhammad was the last prophet referred to as Khatam al-Nabiyyin, the seal of the prophets. Okay, so to me, his importance is absolute. It's not a comparison. There's no comparison. You can't compare him to Isaac Newton or Napoleon or anybody. I mean, there's no comparison. The creator of the entire vastness of the cosmos sent prophets, and he was the last one, the seal of the prophets. And that's extremely important um, for everyone. But what made him the most important? And the author basically um, outlines reasons which I just read it over again, but my original impression, because they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think the original Chinese is a picture is worth 10,000 words. I don't know what the expression is in Chinese, but 10,000 seems to be a big expression for them. But there's a picture here. Can you see it? Okay. And the impression is that the reason Muhammad was so important, so influential, is because he and his people went out and conquered everybody. Um, and so that is not true. It's a misrepresentation. And that's something I need to come back to. The reason for the influence of Muhammad is the Quran. It's as simple as that. I mean, the Quran, his own people were transformed by the Quran, um, and spreading the Quran to Arabia. Arabia was transformed by the Quran, and I guess it could be said that the Quran is the most influential book in history. Okay, and people, we can have an argument about that, about the Bible versus the Quran in terms of influence. Perhaps I'll come back to that in my series, my playlist on the comparative study of the Bible and the Quran. But that really isn't about the content of the Bible and the Quran, but about the history of which of them is more influential. But in actual fact, the Quran is more important in the life and the history and the influence of Muslims than the Bible is to Christians. And you can argue about that, but um, it's history. Um, Muslims, we recite the Quran every day. Most of us, many of us. Well, I'm projecting onto other Muslims, but you must, in order to do salah, which people say call prayers, not prayer, in order to perform salah, you must recite some of the Quran, and sometimes the entire Quran is recited in the course of 1 month, the month of Ramadan. Christians have nothing like that. But at any rate, the life of entire nations um, has been, I hate to use the word revolutionized, reformed, changed, transformed by the Quran. And Muhammad, in delivering the Quran, of course, he became the influence. If you want to check his historical influence, but his influence did not come from conquering people. Um, as a matter of fact, before I close out, I got to come back to this, but there was a major battle um, after the fall of Mecca, and Mecca fell without a fight. Muhammad had become had so many powers. There were 10,000 men, which was huge for Central Arabia. And they surrounded the city, and each man lit his own campfire so that the people would look out to the surrounding hills and see 10,000 campfires, and they realized that they just had to give up, which is what they did. So after Mecca surrendered to Muhammad, There were other tribes, other people in the area who said, "Boy, we got to stop this thing. We can't wait until they become way more powerful." And so they amassed a huge army, an alliance of whole bunches of tribes, and set a trap. And the Muslims walked into the trap. They were surrounded. Their army was disintegrating. And I love to read about this because Muhammad was riding forward while his army was disintegrating. I mean, according to a report I just read, he had an army of 12,000 men, and only 8 men were left surrounding him and protecting him. But his army had disintegrated, and he was moving forward saying, "I am the messenger of Allah. I am the messenger of Allah." He was unflinching, moving forward, and his army had disintegrated, and some of them got their wits about them and came back and started reassembling themselves. And then eventually they actually won this battle. I mean, it was awesome. But they won it after they had just about disintegrated. The whole army was gone. But they came back together and eventually defeated all of those men who had ambushed them. And I read about this and I remembered it and I said, no, that's I can't believe this. And so I called up my best friend Solomon and I said, "Is that really true?" And he said, "Well, that's what he confirmed it. Muhammad was riding. Think about this. What he was riding? He was riding a donkey. So much for those heroic images of Muhammad on horseback with his sword out and everything like that at this major battle. He was the commander and he was riding a donkey. How's that for an image, right? How's that for an image? So I'm just saying that no, we need to have a different image in our minds when we think of Muhammad. And this goes for Muslims too, because there's some of the earliest histories of the Muslims was so much about battles that people forget that this was about a messenger and the message that he spread. Um, and so so the basis of Muhammad's influence is not military prowess or anything like that. It's about delivering a message which he and his followers delivered, and that is the source of the influence. So that is why Muhammad is the most influential person in history. And so I challenge Christians, if you think Jesus Christ is the most influential person, then why don't you follow his teachings, right? I just posted on Facebook the quote from the book of Matthew: "The meek shall inherit the earth." And I say this to those Muslims, those Christians who voted for Donald Trump. The meek shall inherit the earth, right? Um, Blessed are the peacemakers. There are so many things I can share with you because I was raised as a Christian. So I challenge you, if you want to say that Jesus Christ was the most influential person in history, then demonstrate, show that his influence is greater than the influence of Muhammad. Let's have a debate about it, a discussion. Okay? But uh, according to this book and according to what I believe and according to history, you study it on your own. Muhammad was the most influential person in history. So, inshallah, we'll have more discussions of this. Uh, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.